He didn't even look back. Not once. That was the part that stayed with her. Not the words, not the ceremony, not even the bond sealing in front of everyone. Just that. He didn't look back. I've made my decision. Kaelin Draven's voice carried across the ceremonial grounds, steady and absolute, like nothing about this moment could be questioned. And no one did. The pack didn't hesitate, didn't murmur, didn't doubt. They shifted with him, just like they always would. Lyra Vale stood at the edge of it all, exactly where she had learned to stand over the years, close enough to witness, far enough to be forgotten. Her gaze didn't leave him, even as he stepped forward, even as he reached for another, even as the bond snapped into place between him and the woman he had chosen. Applause broke out instantly, loud, certain, final, like something inevitable had just been confirmed. Lyra didn't move, didn't react, because reacting would mean she had expected something different, and she hadn't. Not really. That would have required him to see her, and Kaelin had never looked at her like that. Not once. Not in the quiet moments where they had crossed paths. Not in the late hours where she had lingered longer than necessary. Not even now, when everything was being decided in front of her. She existed in the same space as him. That was all. The realization didn't come as a shock. It settled. Slow. Clean. Unavoidable. Because this wasn't rejection. Rejection would have meant she had been considered. This was absence. Lyra exhaled quietly, her fingers curling slightly at her sides, before relaxing again. The ceremony continued without pause. The bond strengthened. The pack celebrated. The future moved forward. And she remained exactly where she had always been. Unclaimed, unseen, unnecessary. For a brief moment, she wondered what it would feel like if he turned. If he looked at her now, just once. But the thought didn't last, because she already knew the answer. He wouldn't. And somehow, that made everything easier to understand. Lyra didn't leave. That was the part no one would ever understand, if anyone had been paying attention. She stayed. Not out of hope, not out of denial, but because leaving would have required her to believe she had something to walk away from. And she didn't. The territory moved on quickly. It always did. By the next morning, the ceremony was already a memory reshaped into certainty. The new Luna was accepted without question, her presence settling into the pack, like it had always belonged there. Kaelin resumed his routine. Meetings, patrols, strategy. Nothing disrupted, nothing delayed, as if nothing had changed. Lyra watched it all from a distance she had perfected over time, close enough to observe, far enough to remain irrelevant. She kept moving through her days the way she always had, quiet, efficient, unnoticed. Only now. There was no reason to linger, no subtle pull that kept her near certain halls, no unconscious awareness of where he might be. And yet, she still felt it, faint, persistent, the bond she had never spoken of, not real enough to claim, not strong enough to matter, but present, like a thread that refused to disappear completely. It didn't pull her toward him anymore. It just existed, a reminder of something that had never fully formed. Days blurred together without structure. Food became optional. Sleep came in fragments, light, distant, easy to abandon, not because she was trying to punish herself, but because nothing required her to maintain anything. No one noticed when she missed meals. No one questioned when she stopped appearing in certain spaces. Her absence didn't disrupt anything. That realization settled deeper than anything else. Because it wasn't new. It had always been true. Only now. There was nothing left to distract from it. Lyra paused once, standing at the edge of the training grounds, her gaze drifting across the distance where Kalen stood among his warriors, strong, certain, unaffected. Exactly as he should be. Exactly as he had always been. She didn't feel anger, didn't feel betrayal, just distance. Not from him, from everything. And for the first time, she didn't try to close it. At first, nothing about her disappearance stood out. Because Lyra hadn't vanished all at once. She had been fading for days. Gradually, quietly, invisibly. The kind of disappearance no one tracks, because no one is looking. Her routine thinned until it no longer existed. She stopped reporting, stopped showing up where she used to be expected. No one asked why, because no one relied on her. That was the truth she couldn't unlearn now. The territory continued without interruption. Training sessions filled the grounds. Meetings carried on. The new Luna settled deeper into her role, her presence reinforcing stability. Everything moved forward, unchanged, except for one thing. Lyra. Her strength began to slip in ways that didn't demand attention. Her steps slowed. Her balance faltered. Her body felt lighter in a way that wasn't right. Even her scent, soft, subtle, easy to overlook, began to weaken. But scent only matters when someone notices it fading. And no one did. She stayed away from the main grounds without deciding to. Her body simply stopped taking her there. Instead, she found herself drawn toward the outer edges of the territory. Quieter places, unclaimed spaces. Somewhere between belonging and nothing at all. It felt appropriate. Like she was aligning with something she had already become. One evening, or maybe it was morning, time had stopped holding shape. She didn't make it back. Lyra had been walking along the outskirts, her steps uneven, her breath shallow, her vision narrowing at the edges in a way that didn't alarm her as much as it should have. Because alarm requires urgency, and she didn't feel urgent anymore. Just tired. Deeply. Completely. She reached the tree line before her body gave out. There was no dramatic fall. No cry for help. Just a slow collapse. Knees first. Then hands. Then nothing. The forest didn't react. The wind didn't shift. The world didn't pause. Because nothing in it had been waiting for her. And in the territory she had once lived in. No one noticed she hadn't returned. Valor Thorn wasn't supposed to be there. Not in that part of the forest. Not that close to Kalen's territory. His presence had nothing to do with Lyra. At least, that's what he would have said. The border had been stable for months. No disputes. No incursions. No reason for him to personally oversee anything beyond routine. And yet, he had come himself. No escort beyond minimal guard. No announcement. No need. That was how Valor operated. Precise. Controlled. Unpredictable when necessary. He moved through the outer stretch of land with quiet efficiency, his senses tuned to everything that mattered. Shifts in wind. Traces of movement. Foreign scents. Nothing out of place. Until something was. It didn't hit him all at once. It threaded in slowly, faint, barely there, a scent that didn't belong, not to his territory, not to anything strong enough to demand attention, weak, fading, and yet, it caught. Valor stopped, not abruptly, not reactively, just still. His gaze shifted slightly, his senses sharpening in a way that was almost instinctive. There it was again, subtle, Fragile. Wrong. He could have ignored it. Should have, by his own standards. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't significant. But something about it didn't let him move on. Valor turned, not toward the main path, but away from it, following something he couldn't logically justify. Each step took him deeper into the quieter parts of the forest, where the air grew heavier, where scent clung differently, where things either thrived or disappeared. The trail wasn't clear. It didn't guide him cleanly. It flickered in and out, inconsistent, fading in a way that suggested time had already passed. Too much time. And still, he followed, because ignoring it felt incorrect. That was the only way to define it. Not dangerous, not urgent, just unacceptable to leave unexplored. The trees thinned slightly as he moved forward, his pace shifting without conscious decision. Faster now, more direct, until he saw her. At first, she didn't look like anything significant, just a shape on the ground. Still, too still. Valor stopped a few steps away, his gaze locking onto her in a way that didn't immediately make sense. Because something about this was wrong in a way that had nothing to do with territory, nothing to do with threat, everything to do with something he hadn't named yet. And suddenly, he couldn't look away. For a second, Valor didn't move, not because he hesitated, but because something in him shifted, subtle, sharp, unfamiliar. The woman on the ground wasn't dead. He knew that instantly. Her chest rose, barely, her pulse, faint, but there, alive, but not enough. Valor closed the distance in a single step, then another, dropping to one knee beside her without thinking. "Hey!" The word came out rougher than expected, too direct, too urgent. He didn't use that tone, not for anyone. His hand hovered for half a second before settling against her shoulder, turning her slightly toward him. Light. Too light. His jaw tightened. Lyra stirred faintly, her lashes trembling as if the effort alone cost her something. Her eyes opened, just enough, unfocused at first. Then, they found him, and something snapped. Not loud, not violent, but absolute. Valor felt it in a way that didn't align with anything he understood. Recognition. Not memory. Not familiarity. Something deeper. Instinctive. His hand tightened without permission. "You're not dying," he said, his voice lower now, steadier, but edged with something darker beneath it. "Not here." The words weren't reassurance. They were refusal. Lyra's gaze flickered, barely holding onto consciousness. She didn't speak, didn't react. But something in her expression shifted, just slightly, as if his presence had interrupted whatever silence she had been sinking into. Valor didn't analyze it, didn't question why this mattered. He moved. One arm slid beneath her back, the other under her legs, lifting her effortlessly from the ground. She weighed nothing. That wasn't acceptable. Her head fell against his shoulder, her body cold against him in a way that didn't align with life. His grip adjusted instinctively, pulling her closer, stabilizing her without thought. Something in his chest tightened. Not emotion, not concern in any familiar form. Something else, something that didn't allow distance, didn't allow delay. Valor stood, his movements precise now, immediate. No pause, no reconsideration. This wasn't a situation to observe. It wasn't something to report. It was something to act on. Now. He turned without looking back at where she had fallen, because that place, whatever it represented, was no longer relevant. She wasn't staying there, not fading, not disappearing, not under his watch. And for the first time in a long time, Valor didn't care why. Vaelor didn't slow down. Not once. The distance between the forest and his territory disappeared beneath controlled, relentless movement, his grip on her steady, unyielding. She didn't wake, didn't stir. Her breathing remained shallow, fragile in a way that didn't sit right with him. Everything about her felt diminished, like something essential had been draining long before he found her. Valor crossed into his territory without announcement, the guards straightening instinctively as he passed. They noticed. Of course they did. The king returning unannounced was unusual. The king carrying someone unconscious, unfamiliar. That was something else entirely. But no one spoke. No one questioned. Because Valor didn't pause, didn't explain, didn't acknowledge anything beyond the path in front of him. He moved straight through the inner halls, ignoring the subtle shift in the atmosphere as attention followed him. The doors to his private quarters opened without delay, closed just as quickly. And for the first time since finding her, he stopped. Carefully, deliberately, he lowered her onto the bed, his movements controlled in a way that contrasted sharply with the urgency that had brought her here. His hand remained on her for a moment longer than necessary, ensuring, confirming, still breathing, still there. Valor stepped back slightly, his gaze sweeping over her in silence. Up close, the damage was clearer. Pale skin, weak pulse, a scent so faint it barely held form. This hadn't happened suddenly. This was neglect, slow, uninterrupted, unnoticed. His jaw tightened, not in anger, not yet. Something colder, more precise, a calculation without numbers. She's unstable, one of the healers said carefully from behind him, having arrived without being summoned. Valor didn't turn. Fix it. The command was quiet, absolute. The healer hesitated only for a fraction of a second before moving forward. Valor stepped aside, but not far. Never far. He remained within reach, his presence anchoring the space in a way that made the air feel different. Tighter, focused, controlled. Except he wasn't. Not entirely. Because nothing about this situation aligned with how he usually operated. He didn't involve himself like this. Didn't act without information. Didn't react without reason. And yet, here he was, watching, waiting, staying, as if leaving wasn't an option. When Lyra woke, she didn't realize it at first. Consciousness didn't return all at once. It surfaced slowly, like something reluctant to come back. Her body felt heavy, not painful, just distant, disconnected in a way that made movement feel unnecessary. She stayed still, her breathing shallow but steady, her senses gradually sharpening around her. This wasn't the forest. That was the first thing she noticed. The air was warmer, controlled, still. No wind, no cold ground beneath her. Something softer, structured, safe, in a way that didn't feel familiar. Her lashes lifted slightly, her vision adjusting in fragments. Ceiling, stone, space, not empty, occupied. She felt it before she fully saw him. Presence close, unmoving, watching. Lyra's gaze shifted slowly and found him. Valor. He hadn't moved. Not from where he stood beside the bed. Not since she had opened her eyes. There was no relief in his expression, no softness, just focus. Sharp, intent, unyielding. "You're awake." His voice was low, controlled, but it carried something beneath it she couldn't immediately define. Lyra swallowed, her throat dry, her voice barely forming. You found me." It wasn't a question. He didn't answer immediately, just held her gaze in a way that made looking away feel deliberate. "I did." 2 words. Simple. Final. Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable. Just unfamiliar. Because she didn't know what this was. Didn't understand why he was here. Why he hadn't left. Her fingers shifted slightly against the fabric beneath her, testing sensation, grounding herself in something real. "You should have left me there," she said quietly. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't meant to provoke. Just factual, because no one had ever chosen otherwise. Valor didn't react immediately, but something in his posture changed. Subtle, almost imperceptible. "No." The response came without hesitation, without explanation. Lyra frowned faintly, her gaze drifting for a moment before returning to him. "Why?" That question lingered, because it didn't have an obvious answer, and for a second, he didn't give one. Valor stepped closer instead, stopping just within reach, his presence filling the space in a way that made everything else feel secondary. "You were fading," he said. Not gently, not harshly, just truth. Lyra's chest tightened slightly. She didn't deny it, didn't confirm it either, because it didn't matter now. Valor's gaze didn't shift, didn't soften. "You're not anymore." The words settled between them. Not comfort, not reassurance. Something else, something steadier. And for the first time, Lyra didn't feel like she was disappearing. Kaelin didn't notice at first. Not really. Lyra's absence didn't disrupt anything important. That was the truth of it. The territory functioned as it always had. Orders were followed. The new Luna settled into her role seamlessly. Everything remained intact. So there was no reason to look for what wasn't there. Not immediately. It started as something small, a name not mentioned, a presence not accounted for, a detail that didn't surface because it didn't need to. Until it did. "Has anyone seen Lyra?" The question came from a lower-ranking guard, uncertain, almost hesitant, as if asking it wasn't entirely necessary. Kaelin barely looked up. "She's not assigned to anything critical," he said, his tone dismissive, already moving past it. And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because the question didn't disappear. It lingered, not in the room, but somewhere quieter, less defined. Kaelin continued his day without interruption, his focus shifting between matters that required actual attention. But something didn't align. It wasn't urgency. It wasn't concern. Just misplacement. Like a detail that had been removed without being acknowledged. By the time the next report came, it carried more weight. "She hasn't been seen in days." That was different. Kaelin's gaze lifted slightly. Not sharp, not alarmed, just aware. And no one reported it? A pause. "No, Alpha." Of course they hadn't. Why would they? Lyra had never been someone who required reporting. That realization didn't sit the way it should have. Not immediately. But it didn't pass either. "Find her," he said, the command casual, controlled, routine. Because that's what this was. A missing presence. Nothing more. The room shifted back into motion. Orders carried. Tasks resumed. And yet, the thought remained. Unfinished. Unresolved. Because for the first time, Kaelin tried to place her. Not physically. Not in the territory. But in his mind. And he couldn't. Not clearly. Not specifically. Just fragments. Quiet moments. Passing proximity. Nothing defined. Nothing held. Nothing that should have mattered. And yet, now that she wasn't there, The absence had shape, faint, but persistent, like something he had never paid attention to, until it was no longer there to ignore. By the time Kaelin understood, it wasn't sudden. It didn't hit him all at once. It built, slowly, through fragments that refused to stay disconnected. She was last seen near the outer edge. The report was calm, routine, but something in it didn't settle. Kaelin's gaze lifted, sharper now. And no one followed? No, Alpha. There was no reason to. Of course there wasn't. There had never been a reason to follow Lyra. That was the problem. Kaelin dismissed the room with a single gesture, the space clearing quickly, leaving him alone with something he hadn't fully defined yet. He didn't move immediately, because for the first time, he was trying to understand something he had never needed to before. Not strategy, not territory, not power. Her, Lyra. And the realization came in pieces, the way she had always been there, but never in a way that demanded acknowledgement. The way her presence had existed without ever requiring definition, the way she had quietly aligned herself to his space, without ever being claimed by it. Nothing concrete, nothing that should have mattered. And yet, now that she was gone, it didn't feel like nothing. Kaelin exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening slightly as memory sharpened. Not emotional, not personal, just clearer. She'd been fading. That was the word that fit. Not leaving, not rebelling, just disappearing. And he hadn't noticed. Not once. That was the part that didn't settle. Because Kaelin noticed everything. Shifts in behavior, changes in loyalty, weakness within his territory. But not her. Never her. And now, she was gone. Not missing. Not misplaced. Gone in a way that didn't suggest return. Kaelin stepped forward, his gaze settling toward the outer lands beyond his territory, his focus narrowing in a way that wasn't entirely strategic. "Expand the search," he said, when the guards returned. "Beyond the borders." The command was controlled, measured, but it carried something new. Not urgency, not quite. Something closer to correction. Because this wasn't about retrieving something valuable. It wasn't about reclaiming what belonged to him. It was about understanding why something that had meant nothing now refused to feel irrelevant. And for the first time, Kaelin didn't like not having the answer.